Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring.
Hey, it's Josh with There's No Business Like. This week we are taking it back to the Under the Radar series with a conversation with Emma Orme. Kevin and I sat down with producer Emma Orme at Live Artery, New York Live Arts, and had such an engaging conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it. So now, our conversation with Emma Orme.
Hey everyone, I'm Emma Orme. I use she and they pronouns. I am the producing director of the team. I am a creative producer working independently as well. I'm born and raised in Brooklyn. I like to sing sometimes, performer by origin. I think that's the fundamental information for this podcast.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Emma, thank you for the time today to sit down with us to talk about, Reconstructing, Under the Radar, and all those things. Josh will be joining me on this for those listening. So I would just sort of want to start and talk about you first, and talk about your origin story into the arts and what that journey was like to get to the producer side that you're in, or producer role that you're in now.
Yeah, let me try and be brief. I, like many, found my way into theater through performance. I was an actor. I loved acting. I still love acting. Shortly after graduating college, I went right to the Williamstown Theater Festival, and I was an acting apprentice at Williamstown. Shortly after leaving Williamstown, I became a bat at the Flea Theater. So within the first, rest in peace to both of those programs, within the first 4 years of being, trying to work professionally and trying to build my career and build a network, I found myself inside of contexts that attracted young actors who wanted to make new works of theater, who were interested in new plays, which tended to mean that it was a group of actors who were kind of brain first, many of whom are not actors anymore. Not to say that actors aren't brain first, but just the investment, I think, in, or the interest in a Williamstown, the interest in a Flea was an interest in being proximate to the range of artists who were coming and working in those contexts every summer or every year. There were also contexts in which a group of fierce young actors were not being paid, or were being paid very little, to bring their tremendous talents to the space. And in both contexts, those institutions depended heavily on the labor, whether it be hanging lights or like being the star of a show that runs for 2 months, on the labor of that talent force. And in both contexts, I found myself sort of functioning as an organizer for those communities, and like without totally realizing what was happening, being sort of the representative of those communities in interfacing with the administration. And I also just found for myself on a very personal level that I kept finding myself in rehearsal rooms and doing the work I was there to do, which was to be an actor, but also like trying to prove that I was really smart. And on some level, I was starting to clock that I didn't feel like all of myself was visible in my role of actor. Like I had some sort of like potential in these other directions that wasn't being tapped, and I was really desperate for that to be known. But that wasn't. That meant sometimes that I was showing up in the room and trying to push at the room in ways that my role wasn't asking me to. I also found that I was really fascinated by the macro of theater making. I was like, why is the schedule structured this way today? That doesn't make sense to me. Or like, why did we invest all this money in the set when I actually think this show is about these two people standing on stage? And my job as an actor was not really to be involved in those decisions. And I think within a few years of both feeling like fierce advocate of and member of this community of young actors, and like grumbling to friends about all of these sort of infrastructural choices in these contexts. An older friend of mine, like someone who was 5 years older, like a big sister kind of friend, was like, have you ever thought about producing? And she had a new musical coming to the Tank, which, do you guys know the Tank Theater? The Tank in Midtown, fucking brilliant space for young theater makers to make new work. It's affordable, and there's so much programming happening there every single year. It's quite accessible. And I said yes, not knowing what I was agreeing to, and it was a match. I quickly and deeply recognized that this was going to be the context within which I could express myself dramaturgically, I could express my values and actually have the power to implement my values, how time should be spent, how money should be spent, how communication should function. It was my opportunity to advocate for actors. I love actors. Actors are so fucking smart, and we do not have any work without actors. Like, we do not have theater without actors. It doesn't exist. And I think actors are very underestimated and undersupported, and it meant a lot to me. For a moment there, I was doing both, and it meant a lot to me to be able to advocate for actors. I learned that strategic thinking, and the macro was a really beautiful fit for my mind, and so from there, kind of all hell broke loose, and it turned out that there was extreme demand for independent producers and producers in general. And as we know, there's not a huge amount of demand for actors because there are so many of them. And demand and interest matched harmoniously, and my career kind of took off from there.
Emma, that's really interesting because there's a lot to unpack there. One, I love this idea of you just saying yes, not really fully knowing what producing is. Mostly because I think that's sort of where the magic happens. It's like where people are like, yes, I'm in. And then, being like, I don't actually know what I'm doing. I often look back in my career, and there was a job that I took that years, like 5-6 years into the job, and, I was successful at it. Like, I look back at that job description and I went, what was I thinking? Like, I didn't know any of this stuff, but I was like, yeah, I can do this. So I think it's sort of can be somewhat common in our industry of this really confident thing, and I'm sure that there's moments that you look back and go, what was I thinking?
I mean, that's really just how this podcast started. We're gonna do this thing. How do you do it? I don't know. Let's go.
No, I mean, it's my entire journey from that point onwards is fueled by like a deranged, blind belief in my own ability to learn on the job. Like that is true for my work as a producing director at the team as well. I mean, Rachel Chavkin and Matt Ross, the head of the board, and Libby King, and the many folks who decided to hire me into that position, which is like this is really the first job I've had where I was one of a pile of tens and tens and tens of applications that was a job listing I found on the internet that many people sent me, thinking it would be a good fit. And one of the responsibilities of the job of producing director of the team, because you are essentially you are one of two full-time staff members, and you are the one senior producing managing staff member, which means it is your responsibility to make sure that the financial life of the organization is healthy. It is your job to manage the organizational budget. I had never managed an organizational budget until starting with the team. I had managed show budgets. I had had a loose relationship with the budget that the organization I worked with before, Hypocrite Theater Company, which develops South Asian theater and film, their organizational budget. I had a loose relationship with it because of the nature of the staffing of that organization. So I was really learning on the job, and I am so grateful for every leap I've either taken, convincing myself that I can do it, or someone else has given me the chance to take, because now I know how to manage an organizational budget, and I think I'm good at it, and I think it's like the kind of greatest manifestation of the desire to implement my values on a macroscopic level. Like that, the organizational budget is the best site for that work. And it's powerful too to then produce a show within the context of an organizational budget that you are responsible for, because you are accountable for all of the allocation that you made towards that show. You're responsible for it. Like there's no one above you to go talk to about why you only have X amount of dollars for the set. You made that choice. I made that choice. And that's, it's really humbling, because when you make the organizational budget, which is always, months before you're actually into the fiscal year and before you've actually received the funding that you think you project you're going to receive, you don't always, you're projecting your best guesses of how the year is going to go, how the project's going to be made, what artistic choices will have clarified by the time you're spending that money, and you don't always guess right. And it's quite humbling, because you're accountable to that document regardless. Yeah, I don't even know where I lost myself in all that.
You actually, you touched on something that I think that a lot of people tend to overlook, is like, you can have organizational values, but like your budget, like that actually defines and dictates those values, because where you're putting your money and your dollars, like that shows what your actual values are. So it's pretty rare that I talk to people who are in a position that are managing budgets, that they've made that connection, which is, it's kind of cool. So I loved hearing that from you. I want to just sort of like look at like what you're doing producing wise. When you were talking about like, let's make it maybe a little bit easier and just focus on like a show. If you're just producing a show, for those that maybe haven't been in that position, like what are the things that, what does your job look like? What are the things that you're doing in that front?
So contextual.
Yes.
I'll take Reconstructing.
Perfect.
Which is the team's newest big work of theater. And the team, for those who are new to that organization, is an ensemble that was founded by a group of artists: Libby King, Kristen C., Rachel Chavkin, Jake Margolin, Jill Fruitkin, friends who met at NYU and started to devise work together. And slowly but surely, their work developed enough of a fan base that it required infrastructure, and then a mini institution was formed around them making this big devised work. That's important. They make their work, author it collectively. So taking Reconstructing as an example, what do I do as producer? Let me go through all of the categories of work. Okay, so I think of myself as a creative producer, which tends to mean that I get myself very involved in thinking about process and how to structure process, which is really really not formulaic when you're working in a devising context. That's true for Lisa and Lena's work on Ratcatchers. It's true for the team's work on Reconstructing. A playwright is not handing us a text that we then go into 4 weeks of rehearsal for, that we then go into 3 weeks of previews and then a production for. The work requires a really bespoke structure that it has to both be responsive to the evolving needs of the piece. So for example, in Reconstructing world, we shared a workshop production draft of the piece last year at BAM. Coming out of that time, we learned that the music was incredibly important and fertile ground for the emotional life of the show, but it was relatively fresh in its conception at BAM, and that one of the things we wanted to dedicate resources to in the time between BAM and Under the Radar was the building out of the score of the show. And so I had to put my head together with the musicians, who are also, with the composers, who are also the actors and the writers and the musicians and the multi-instrumentalists, to figure out where their schedules and our budget aligned to meet the creative goals of that generative composition work in the year that we had available to us. And then think really strategically about how to maximize time together. Sometimes having too much time is not useful. Sometimes concentrated work periods are really useful. Sometimes, in order to be most productive, you need to put your artists in the woods. Sometimes you need to let them go home to their own bed and be with their partner every night. And that's how they're going to be most productive. And I think this group of artists has learned a lot about that, about where they're most productive. Are they most productive on the road, in a secluded environment, working as integrated in their daily lives? So I worked very closely with the composition team to structure their process. It's a little arbitrary when you're looking at an entire year, right? You're like, okay, I guess we could do, what if we did 40 hours here and 40 hours here? And the goal of this time is to build the musical vocabulary of the show. And the goal of this time is to finish and record the compositions that we will then only have enough time to rehearse once we get to the Under the Radar run. We will no longer be in a generative space. We will be in a rehearsal space. So how can I work with you to be sure that we have the time in place to complete the generative work? Of course, with a group of artists that are multi-hyphenates like this, the generative work is never done, but it is very useful to be very clear about what we have capacity to accomplish once we are boots on the ground in rehearsal. Is it a generative rehearsal period, or is it a rehearsal period? Which I find with devising groups, that definition can be so productive. Even if it's a little bit of a lie and there's always generative work happening, it's incredibly important. So that's a flavor of the creative producing work that I do. I know the score deeply, I know the script deeply, and I know the artists deeply. I know how each one of them works. They all have different needs, and I marry all of those intelligences with my budget and my sense of time and my capacity as a producer to determine, okay, what's the best structure for making this music? That's creative producing. Then there's budget. I am responsible for the organizational budget, but if I were just a line producer, because I'm responsible for the budget at large at the organization, I also manage the show's budget. If I were working as a line producer on the show, that would still be true. I'd manage the show's budget. So I manage the budget. I make sure that we're accountable to the projections that we held for every department. I am responsible for determining how much we can pay our artists weekly. Because our artists wear so many hats, we tend to, I have very mixed feelings about most favored nations, which is the silly jargon for paying everyone of a certain level of work the exact same amount, because equity and equality are not the same. But in this context, it's very hard to delineate between amounts of work done because everyone is wearing 100 hats. Mm-hmm. At a certain point in the team's evolution, we decided to keep the complexity in the creative process and make the financial infrastructure around artists' time slightly simpler. I still have mixed feelings about it. I think there's a lot of studying of that practice to be done for us. But anyways, I'm responsible for establishing how much we can pay artists every week. At the team, we try and raise weekly artist salaries by at least 5% every year, cost of living raise. And in past years, we've done 10%. So that's the finances. Then there is the work of a general manager, which is like managing contracts, negotiating with the unions. We work with Actors Equity. We work with SDC, Stage Directors and Choreographers Union. We work with USA, United Scenic Artists, determining which contract we're going to live on with all three of those unions, and then negotiating those, and then ensuring that our contracts adhere to the LOAs that we write, the letters of agreement that we write, adhere to those guiding principles for all three of those unions. And then there is the work of relationship with the presenter, relationship with the venue. What is the financial arrangement between the team, the entity that is making the work, and the venue, the entity that's going to host that work? That was Brooklyn College, the Tao Center, within the context of Reconstructing. What's the financial arrangement? Who's going to pay for what? Who's responsible for what departments? Are we collaborating in every department? Are you responsible for ticketing and I won't touch it? Are you responsible for marketing and I won't touch it? Or am I responsible for marketing and you won't touch it? Are we collaborating on everything? Are we allowed to sell concessions? Does your venue have concessions? Front of house, how does your front of house operation work? So all of this kind of venue relations, venue management, building that agreement, and then managing it live once you discover what both parties are actually bringing. And of course, you can only project so much in the contract, and you stay flexible throughout and adjust. And then marketing, that's huge. Press, social media. And then within the context of the team and Lisa and Lena's work, these are companies and artists that want to bring their work to national and international stages. So they are not interested in their work stopping at New York City, which means that I as a producer have to work hard to get national and international presenters and performing arts centers to come see our work, to then consider taking us on tour. So then there is a kind of like the work of kind of the booking agent, representing the show and communicating with those presenters around how much it costs and what it looks like to tour our show, what our company size is. Tell me when I should stop talking, because clearly, like, there is so much. The work of a producer is.
Yeah, no, this is perfect, because I think it sort of wraps it in a context of. I think there are certain folks that will completely understand like what a producer does, but I also think that there are plenty of folks that are listening who don't.
Especially when it comes to creation of new work as a producer.
Yeah.
And that's in our touring world that we're primarily seated within. You buy the show comes in, it goes up, you're done.
Yeah.
How it gets to that point for it to even be able to hit the road is pretty unknown for a lot of people, I believe. So with that context, what specifically as producer do you look at and look for to get something tour ready versus just a created work? Because those are two very different things.
Oh yeah. I want to add one major category of work that I like completely neglected and is kind of my whole reason for being, which is care work. That's like 50% of what I do, I think, as a producer, is care work for the artists. And I mean company management, like providing snacks and like making sure they know where they're going and where the water fountain is, and that they have, enough hangers in the dressing room. But it's also about being incredibly attentive to the range of life experiences and personalities and needs that are coming into the space, and trying to meet each artist in their full humanity, while also trying to maintain some degree of boundary for yourself as a producer around your capacity to really meet every single need in a bespoke fashion. But that's like my whole reason for being is to make artists feel respected enough that they can do their work productively. And that gets woven through every department, through the contracting, through the budgeting, through the marketing, through the fundraising. I forgot about fundraising.
Yes.
Huge. But it's also it's a distinct category and layer of work, and so much of it is in communication and in perception and physical presence in the room. That's very meaningful to me. I try and be physically present in rooms. When I work as a producer, I don't understand producing from an office. And that's not to say I judge it. I just don't know how to do it yet. And I don't know if I want to figure that out eventually. But with Lisa and Lena's show is quite challenging because Reconstructing is huge. It's my full-time job, was my priority, and I had to miss out on a lot of in-room time with Lisa and Lena. And that's just, it's much harder for me to do my work sensitively when I'm not physically there to observe what's happening. Anyway, so that's sidebar. Your question, which is how do you prepare work for touring? It's important to establish that intention, I think, when you start to create a show, because it drives so many choices that you make. For example, like if you're seated in the New York City theater ecosystem, the New York City theater ecosystem functions quite separately from the touring ecosystem. The team and Lisa and Lena and Elevator Repair Service and Half Straddle and Big Dance Theater, they exist at this kind of strange kind of Venn diagram overlap between interdisciplinary performance work, touring ecosystem, and New York City theater ecosystem. And when I say New York City theater ecosystem, what I'm meaning in this moment is work that is built to have a multi-week run or multi-month run in New York City, and that's the fucking goal. That's the dream for the work, is if you can land that multi-week or multi-month run in New York City, you have achieved what you set out to achieve for that show. And okay, so if that's your dream, January and like putting your work up at this time of year when APEP is happening and when ISPA is happening doesn't matter. You don't need those eyes on your work. If you are trying to tour your work, you really need those in-person eyes on your work. You can send a video out, but it's just not the same. And so it takes a lot of strategic thinking 1 to 2 to 3 years in advance to land your work affordably in this January festival period. I think it's really important for artists, generative artists, to know and understand that to put your work up in a January festival is largely a bill that you are footing. It is very rare within the current festival ecosystem that the presenting venue is footing that bill. It is largely self-produced work in partnership with a venue. The venue is, of course, putting forward their own resources, but it's rare that the venue is producing the work. The venues in New York, it's often that they are presenting the work within this kind of January festival landscape. That is expensive. It's expensive to put up your own work. So you have to not only be vying for the attention of festival curators to land your work in the festivals that will get you the most eyes, Under the Radar, Prototype, whatever it be. You also have to prepare financially to make it possible to pay for that work to go up basically all on your own. The festival will make a very small contribution. The venue, depending on where you work, will make a larger one or a littler one. So there's financial planning. There is networking, trying to get your work in front of these curators, and then there's scheduling, trying to make sure that you have all the artists available for the right dates a long time in advance. And then there's how you build the show. And this one is like, with Reconstructing in particular, it makes me laugh a little bit, because if you look at Reconstructing, the first thought you have is not, that's so easy to bring on the road, no problem, 2-story house, get that on a ship to Europe, no problem. It's a very large, it is on the larger end of shows that tour in our small organizational generative artist ecosystem. It's not if you compare to a Broadway show that's touring. But because of the experimental nature of the work, presenting venues have to work harder to pull in their audiences. And so this is on the larger side of, I think, what a presenter can hold financially and like literally physically, because the set's physically large. And I've learned a lot about what is required in the scenic and sound in particular, and lighting and video design to make a show agile and lightweight and tourable. And Reconstructing is tourable. It's just a more expensive touring show. Lisa and Lena's show packs up into a few boxes of curtains and disco balls and some bins. And it's not so light that we can put it all in a suitcase, but it's probably a small van, or like something we're attaching to the back of a truck as opposed to a 53-foot truck.
Yeah.
And so if I were starting on a new team show now, I would suggest that we make a smaller show. And company size I feel less consumed with, because I think people are craving seeing more bodies on stage right now in this kind of moment of like the endless one-person show. And I think that sort of maximalism should be embraced. And 7 people is actually really not that many, which is the cast size for Reconstructing. But I think the physical footprint of the show is it's important to consider how lightweight it is. Just because that will maximize your opportunities. I mean, the thing is I'm like, I feel very proud of Reconstructing for being relentlessly ambitious and pushing on the edges of every container it will ever go into, because that's what it wanted to do and wanted to be. And it just means that our options as far as the venues we can live in are going to be slightly more limited.
And it also, it requires you to build those relationships. That is a lot of what you're working towards. You've obviously we talked a lot about Reconstructing in that. So I want to like back up just a little bit. And can you, for our audience, can you describe Reconstructing and sort of frame that up a little bit?
Absolutely. Reconstructing is a new work of theater that the team, in its newest form, so a company of artists that is more expansive than the group that founded the organization, came together to create, starting about 7 years ago, it started as an exploration of Gone with the Wind as a Confederate monument, and it turned into a piece about this multiracial group of artists trying to make a work of theater together about American history when not everyone was seeing and carrying that history in the same way. It has become a work that I think functions kind of like a Russian doll. There are 3 layers of drama in the work, 3 layers of reality in the work. There is our meta-theatrical layer, which is what we first encounter in the show, which is the actual artists, our ensemble of artists trying to make this work. We meet them in process. They discover that in order to make this really sensitive and intense work about race, maybe it would be useful if they created fictional characters. From that meta-theatrical layer, we then dive into this layer of fictional characters, these 2 professors who are working together on a college campus, 1 white man, 1 black woman. Those 2 college professors summon up 2 historical figures, an enslaver from Virginia and one of the men that he enslaved. And the show basically accordions back and forth between this meta-theatrical layer of the artist ensemble trying to make this work, the fictional and the historical. And it ends up being about, I think, the multiplicitous ways in which white bodies, black bodies, bodies of all racial and ethnic history have to walk through their histories differently. And there is no one right way to tell the story of race in America. It's a deeply, deeply personal story for every single individual in this country. And it's also formally, it's like it has a ton of music, a ton of dance, a ton of video. There's a 2-story house on stage. It's incredibly interdisciplinary and lush and dense and kind of moves like water, but also kind of feels like reading an encyclopedia.
Josh and I saw the piece, and I think you've described it really well. And we had some friendly debate on it and talked about like what we liked, what we I don't want to say didn't like. We thought we would have approached differently if it was, if we were producing, which I think always happens. What we like really talked about is there's a lot that happens. Like the encyclopedia analogy that you just made is so accurate, and I debated whether I liked that or not, and I still do, because when we talk about theater and you talk about the argument that you want to make, like it's so much easier to take one straight path and say like this is what we're going to focus on. However, when we're talking about race and racism in America, like there's a lot that gets unpacked in that. And it leads to all these different conversations. So there's a level of like, I mean, it is all true life experiences, but like it feels like a conversation on stage that unfolds in front of your eyes, and it's a lot. I also think that it's worth pointing out that the music is very important, and there's also like a really great analogy when it comes to polyrhythms and sort of like our different lived experiences that our colleague Jordan and I just absolutely fell in love with.
And also the remnant wavelengths that are lying nearly dormant within spaces as an analogy for the long-term effects of what has happened in this country as far as race relations and as far as slavery and how that's led. And that wavelength that also tied it directly into the polyrhythms and the way all of these analogies touch base through musical reference was just a beautiful thread.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so awesome to me that the polyrhythm of it all like really landed for everyone, because I do think this piece is laden with metaphor, and I do think for me, I think it's the strongest metaphor. We spent so much of this process, I think, thinking that what success looked like would be that we were all on the exact same page and on the exact same wavelength and clapping the exact same beat. And once the room realized and accepted and embraced that actually the beauty of this group of people gathering to make this work is the number of distinct rhythms that are present in the room, and that we can only make the good work we're trying to make if we let all of those like rhythms breathe and coexist and sync up sometimes and often not. And there was a lot of peacefulness in this phase of the process in a way that I didn't feel a year ago when we worked on the piece, that I think came from a mature comfort or a mature kind of relationship to that reality, that like life is about kind of finding and owning your own rhythm while remaining incredibly attentive to and respectful of the rhythms of the people around you. And it's like, sounds cliche now as I'm like living exclusively in this metaphor, but it's so beautiful and real feeling to me. And that like you really can't show up in a room respectfully and usefully, a collaborative room in a romantic relationship anywhere, in your family, if you don't fucking know your own rhythm, like if you haven't tended to your own shit. And that's that is hugely important. And also in our culture of like excessive attention on self-care, it's so, so, so important to still stay so attentive to the rhythms of those around you, and particularly when those need more space, when it's like time for you to quiet yours for a minute.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy that that came through, because that was, for me, I think, the big revelation of this chapter of the process.
Yeah. I'll also say that when I was talking with Jordan, my colleague, is he is a musician, and so like he really like resonates with music and those sort of things. And one of the things I always really enjoy from Jordan's perspective, especially when it comes to music, is I'll like something, and Jordan will be able to tell me like, they're not really that good of players. When we walked out of there, and when we walked out of there, he was like, those are some strong musicians. He was talking about like just like the technical brilliance of the musicians. So bravo to them, also doing the acting, also doing the dancing, also doing that. And
shout out to Maya Sharp, Eric Berryman, Jillian Walker, James Monaco, Flaco Jimenez. I mean, they are fucking doing the most.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've been cursing. Is that okay on this podcast?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you are.
I kind of want to know your favorite parts of the show. I know that's not what we're here to talk about, but I'm like, just to each one moment that lifted off. I'm so curious.
Oh, it's for me, hands down. It is. It's the definition of the polyrhythm part of that, because it. Yeah, it's. I think it is the perfect metaphor for like. For it's a perfect metaphor for that conversation, for those things, and it's a perfect metaphor, I think, for someone who is trying to be an ally, who is also has to recognize that like you can't just mimic that culture, like you can't just take that over because you've been so consumed in it. Like you also have to be yourself and be yourself in those spaces, and if you do pay too much attention to one thing, like you can start merging into that rhythm. And so like hearing that explanation and sort of that, and then also compounded for me was like, oh, it's like it's talked about in the beginning, but like you can really see how it's echoed throughout. So I'd say that, and then I'll also add the conversation between the two directors, where it's just a moment where
it's the same for me. That moment where they are sitting and saying, there was the one phrase of, what do you do to protect yourself from me? And the vulnerability of asking that question and what that means for the relationship that you have. That has stuck with me so strongly from that point.
Yeah. So I think it's for me. I think it's those two moments. There's some like other visually stunning moments. The whole fashion dance, ratchet fashion, like the use of video, and like kind of sort of a complex use of video. Like it's not like it's.
Kate Freer is a projection mapping magician.
Yeah, because what's
the part where Viney Burrows, our incredible elder of this project, who transitioned a couple years ago, is mapped onto the little plinth.
Yes.
And then moves on to the house. Come on.
Yeah. I was watching that and just being like, oh, it is.
And she worked at a mile a minute. Yeah. Like she does that fast.
Wow. Yeah. So it was very impressive. We are sort of. I feel like I could have another hour-long conversation with you, but I obviously want to be respectful of your time. So before we wrap this up, we always do this thing on the podcast where we like to take people sort of back in time, and take them to a moment in their career, and if they could talk to their former self. For you, I want to take you back to saying yes. When you said, yes, I'm going to produce that show, or like, yes, I'm going to like enter this realm without really knowing those things. If you could go back and talk to your former self at that moment, what advice would you give them?
One, I think, is trust that self-definition is going to come through many channels in your life, not just through work. Which is what I was desperately seeking at the time. Was like that was plan. Like, my whole sense of self-worth had to come from my work. I wasn't consciously trying to manifest that, but that's where I was psychologically. And that diversity of sources of self-definition through your work, through relationships, like being a participant in the civic universe, will allow you to be an excellent producer in a way that doesn't compromise the work you're doing on yourself as a person. And I'll be a little less vague for a second, which is like, I think if you are a people pleaser, the trap of producing is that you are spending your life trying to meet the needs of others, and your capacity to do that well or not will make you feel good or bad. And that actually there's a hugely powerful lesson in being able to deeply, profoundly, perceptively serve the artists you're working with while maintaining boundaries around your capacity and accepting that you can't fix all the problems of the industry, all the problems of being a person living in New York City and trying to meet the rising cost of life, being a person living in this demented country and under all of the oppressive forces that we are living under. You can do your best to carve out a slice of space that will make people feel respected for the hours that they are in that space. And you cannot solve all of these infrastructural problems. And the key to like maintaining your own emotional health and making sure you're not doing toxic behaviors while being a producer is like paying really close attention to that line. And it's a fucking work in progress over here. But I hope any of that made any sense. But no, that's what I would say.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that no one knows what they're doing. No one knows totally 100% what they're doing. So when you think when you have a question and you don't ask it because you're like, fuck, I should know the answer to that question, ask the question. Because you probably shouldn't know the answer to that question. Always better to ask questions. It's always better to tell people when you're struggling, you think you've made a mistake, you're worried about failure. Always tell people. It goes so much better than trying to hide it and pretend like you've got it all on lock.
That is a great piece of advice. I think that is a great spot to end. So Emma, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for
having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate it. It was really fun.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslike.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslike.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends.